Welcome to the Coal-Fired Power Air Pollution Control Program webinar this morning. And we will be covering the markets and the technology, but more importantly, a whole route to market for suppliers of air pollution control equipment for the coal-fired power industry. So the market is changing due to a number of different things. One is the global opportunities with obviously the big developing markets in parts of Asia, the advent of IIoT and remote O&M, and we're entering a post-digital era with the industrial Internet of Wisdom empowering IIoT, and it will have an impact similar to the digital impact on the industrial revolution advances. The coal APC program should be centered around the lowest total cost of ownership validation and implementation. When you boil all the decisions that go into building and operating a coal-fired power plant, they can be segmented into thousands of decisions about what component is going to be best, and the way that can quantitatively be determined is with the validation of lowest total cost of ownership, and that is no easy task. But the program really starts from the view of a supplier with each prospect. Obviously, we're talking coal-fired power here. Each of the APC processes in a coal-fired power plant, each product, and then the lowest total cost of ownership validation for that product in that process, and then collaboration with others, and they would be people with complementary equipment, architect, engineers, people within your own company in other divisions. And with that collaboration, you create this industrial Internet of Wisdom and a combination of tools that allows you effectively to connect and communicate with the end users, and then make the sales and as a result increase the corporate sales for that product in the coal-fired power industry. In the post-digital era, with experts analyzing an avalanche of data, it will be possible to determine the total cost of ownership for each product and each process in each industry. The supplier can determine where he can validate the lowest total cost of ownership on what we call a Tier 1 basis. And Tier 1 is a general validation for most applications. However, when you're making a presentation to a specific customer, the supplier should offer a Tier 2 lowest total cost of ownership validation, which takes into account variables such as local regulations, coal characteristics, and hundreds of other variables between plants. In the US, the decision making just got more complicated with the Trump rollback of some of the federal regulations and leaving some of these decisions to the state again. So we've got 50 times as many regulations to deal with on that basis, at least that could be decisive. The LTCOV, to be creditable, has to be backed up with papers and analyses, most of which are already available, but need to be made accessible. The LTCOV needs to be the product of decision systems with subject matter ultra expert input. And the subject matter ultra expert is somebody who not only is a subject matter expert, but uses the industrial Internet of Wisdom decision systems to become even more knowledgeable. The validation is a continuing process based on changing competitor offerings, industry developments, hopefully R&D with improved products by the company itself. And these can be determined and analyzed through wise crowd decisions, which is another way of talking about the collaboration. The So you basically can put a schematic here of how that happens. You've got cogenerations, APC, you've got the product, total cost of ownership. You really have to look at the competitor's total cost of ownership. Otherwise, you can't submit or claim that you've got the lowest total cost of ownership. When you do this generically for all the plants, but then you have a particular quotation to prepare for one plant, you have to come up with the tier 2 LTCOV and take into account a number of these other variables. And by the way, the McElvain Company is trying to help you with analyzing. For instance, we have cost for every country of the world in some of these different areas. And the decision system really involves cost classifications. In each area of evaluation, how does the product cost compare to alternatives? And these have to be based on papers and analyses, the contribution of experts, subject matter experts, and then subject matter ultra experts. So you really have 3 tiers of expertise input, with the SMUE being at the top, but probably also being the most narrow. He would be focused on a very small area. And then you have the total cost of ownership. Then the competitor TCOs, then the lowest total cost of ownership validation for the supplier, and then the go-to-market strategy with webinars and revision of the LTCOV through an analysis of new papers and, again, the wise crowd decisions. McElvain can provide purchase forecasts for each product at each coal-fired power plant worldwide. And here, for instance, would be an example in the FGD area. And there are about 15 corporations with about 55% of all the purchases. Sheno and Guodian have emerged and now are operating over 225,000 megawatts of coal-fired power plants, which is more than all of Europe. So, and all of them have FGD for systems, for instance. So, and then you can get down into the details for a corporation such as EVN at a particular plant, and how much is going to be purchased of a specific product, such as nozzles, since they are putting in FGD, and they would have other areas where nozzles would be used. So that is the purchase forecast that can help the supplier move forward with a program. And so the tier 2 LT, the lowest total cost of ownership validation, really needs to be the output of the program, along with then a marketing aspect where you identify the prospects. Your right to win strategy is, again, based around this identification of lowest total cost of ownership. The wisdom package is something that needs to be considered, because whether it's a nozzle or whether it's a fan or whatever, there is a wisdom component, and you can be monitoring those fans on a continuing basis, and you can provide edge software, and you can also have a system that then integrates that information into the cloud and the general process management system. And when you add that package, then you increase your market, and you had what we say is a wisdom-based opportunity or obtainable market. Collaboration is another aspect of success here, and we're thinking in terms of not only with other people in your other divisions within your company with complementary product activity, engineers, others, but also with magazines and conferences and the exhibitions and all the other activities. All of it has to be uh, carefully integrated into a multi-year campaign, and where you leverage the LTCOV to boost your sales. As you're making your sales presentations, you're going to get valuable feedback, and you should be continually reviewing the Tier 2 LTCOV. You should be upgrading your package, the hardware, and any kind of service and software you're providing along with it, and continually be making available new Tier 2 LCTOVs, lowest total cost of ownership validations. So that is that's the program there. What we'll quickly do here is go to the system itself that you should be employing. And what we're saying is that as a supplier, in order to come up with the total cost of ownership validation, you're going to have to gather all the background information that would affect your product, as well as the information on your competitors, on new processes, and so forth. And to get a true validation, you're really going to have a high level of knowledge, and this can be done on an organized basis. And here is an example that you can be using. We can provide you some of this information to incorporate into your system, and you should have a system that is both internal with a lot of the competitor information, for instance, and then have a display that might be even similar to this, but it would be for your customers and for your sales people. And it could be quite narrow. This is a coal-fired power plant decisions, but we do have, for instance, subcategories here. And for instance, we have one individual on the phone here that's just is interested particularly in dry scrubbers. So we have a whole dry scrubber decision guide. We have a whole service just on this, and you can go in to particular titles and particular types of products and so forth, and see, all the information on those products for that particular for dry scrubbing, and then all the comparisons. So you have for instance, a dry scrubber decision guide here, where we try to get into the basics of SDA and CDS and performance of each one of them. And this is really just the top of the organization chart, so to speak, or the need for these decision systems and decisive classification. So you get into, what, for instance, the dual atomizers versus rotary atomizers. So this is one view of it, and the contention that one of these alternatives might be better in a particular application. So this, I think, gives you the kind of idea of what is available on that kind of a basis. Another way to look at it, you can go, for instance, if you go to the wet calcium FGD and you go in by product, let's just take agitators for an example. So this is a bunch of articles on and webinars that we've done on agitators. And here again, we're talking, this I think is more instructive generally, is all these decision guides you have a whole sequence of decisions that, do you retire the plant? If you're putting in, for instance, a new FGD system, rather than put it in, you might just retire the plant. What are you going to do about particulate? What are you going to do about the solids? What are you going to do about the NOx? And then the acid gas and the air toxics. And then how does that impact the water? And so you have all these decisions that are interdependent on whether to put in an FGD system, whether to shut down the plant, or whether to operate the plant on a more limited basis, whether to operate it with gas. And all of it depends too on your fleet utilization, what's your capital budget, and what's the fuel selection going to be in the future. So, but then if you're again looking at oxidation, you've got a number of types of scrubber systems where oxidizers are used, and then you of course get into the details, for instance, of where some of these might be. And so this is the website itself we have on the subject, but we also have continuing data. So if you go under search and then you go in under agitator, you can search by date probably than by more than by relevance. You might want to do that. And so the let's see, here we go. So and then we click on hundreds. We got hundreds of articles here, and they get into individual systems and into all sorts of details. And a lot of this is from our monthly FGD newsletter, and you can see in this particular MHPS system the location and use of the agitators, where you have a down and then up flow, a reverse flow in your FGD systems. The other aspect of that too is you can actually go into the older data in a very organized fashion. So here we are, for instance, with the older intelligence system, but a lot of this still has a lot of basic, older but good information. You go in under the product branch, you can go in under agitators again, and then you have some general information. You can go into to information that would be on the options. And again, we have the types of papers that need to be aggregated and put in with the proper keywords so they can be accessed. So, here's an experience with a particular agitator and all the problems and details about it. So, on a cumulative basis, getting all this information becomes very, very important. So let's just see. Let's get back. So we're going back to the agitators here, and then then we can go to sources. And then again, if you're going to be doing a competitive analysis, getting on all the information about what lightning is done and products, contacts, where there have been active and so forth there, and then you can go into some of the details here as to the product themselves itself. So all of this is the type of information that any buddy supplying agitators should have at their fingertips and should be able to selectively be displaying it to the customers. But more importantly, all this is the basis not only for determining the lowest total cost of ownership, but actually validating it in the minds of your customers. If you can show them that you have all this background data as well, and a lot of case histories and things that would demonstrate the performance of your equipment and your competitors, and the knowledge of the processes and the systems that give you special insight, then you can have a convincing validation. So we're essentially saying that the validation is definitely a continuing thing that you should be doing, and is necessary to make that case. Now, we do have a recorded webinar that you can get to on our website. I'll just quickly go through it. It's a little bit older, but a few months ago. But it essentially talks about the world coal-fired boiler market and some very interesting data, such as the installed versus replaced new ratio, that in most countries of the world, when it comes to agitators or nozzles or valves or whatever, that most of your market is going to be in replacement, and a relatively small percentage is going to be new. So it's almost all replacement, for instance, in Western Europe right now. And so in total, it's 10 to 1 that for any of this equipment goes in on a replacement basis. So the revenues for flow and treat equipment are going to vary by company considerably, and you can see that the amount of money that's being spent by Shenandoah, for instance, over the next 5 years is going to be over $11 billion on flow and treat equipment. We're estimating FGD component purchases as an example right here. And then who are all these decision makers? Because you have some OEMs that are among the decision makers as well. So for instance, what it would be agitators or initial valves and so forth, it would probably not be the end user. And the same thing goes for your EPCs, and a lot of your boiler companies are also your EPCs. And this is a little bit different view of the program that you need to pursue. And but its advanced market research is certainly important. The sea change in the market is really this IIoT, because Luminant, for instance, is remotely monitoring its coal and other power generators, but also offering this as a service to industrial power generators in Texas. So you've got one customer now that can be monitoring all the valves in the state of Texas in industrial boilers as well as utility boilers. And this is a huge base of information, which definitely results in lowest total cost of ownership data that can be utilized. And of course, GE, Siemens, Emerson, Doosan, and so forth are all incorporating process management and data analytics into their systems that they're offering the power plants. And in terms of the markets, you've got the total available market, and then the serviceable available market. But then you have SOM, which is the serviceable obtainable market. and that would be where you have the lowest total cost of ownership without the wisdom part of the package. But when you add the wisdom part of the package to it, you end up with a bigger potential market. And if you're a supplier, the wisdom part of the package can be as little as just having subject matter experts and ultra experts on your staff to be available on demand, and then from there going to obviously the service, which many companies would be offering anyway, and then on to remote monitoring and service as a function of the remote monitoring, and from there to operational advice, and in many cases, at least with the third parties, they're going on to the actual operation of the plants. And you have companies like NACE who are moving. They're now part of Itochu, and they are operating hundreds of coal-fired and gas-fired utilities around the world. And with the Industrial Internet of Wisdom and with companies like NACE taking advantage of it, they will be operating even more plants. So there is a sea change in the market, which we're identifying here. And by the way, this is a recording, and we'll see that that each of the people attending this morning gets access to that recording plus this recording. And the product evolution is very important. And for instance, we have even just without a lot of effort, we have uncovered some opportunities that would be substantial for suppliers, such as making rare earth feedstocks from coal-fired boilers. So these are some of the opportunities that are available. And then certainly the LTCOV program is the essential tool that is going in the future to be much more of a factor in these decisions. And the reason is that right now, most plants make purchasing decisions based on inadequate information and realize that even if a supplier says, I've got the lowest total cost of ownership, they really don't have the capability to evaluate that claim. But with the Industrial Internet of Wisdom, the validation will be available, which means that any plant that's planning to be around for any length of time will want to take advantage of the lowest total cost products rather than those that that they're guessing about or have just because it's the lowest price or because the supplier is somebody that they rely on without regard to any kind of an analysis. And identifying the prospects, I think, is something that we are leading on because we, for instance, are identifying all the coal-fired power plants and all the gas turbine plants. We have project tracking on all of those on a continuing basis, so we can help suppliers with that end of it. And then we do have a lot of different services like the tracking system and the gas turbine system that provide all that kind of data. So that is the program that we're talking about here this morning. And I would be glad to answer any questions that anyone might have before we close out the discussion today. Would there be a question from the floor? If not, I would encourage you to contact us here at the McIlvaine Company. I'm Bob McIlvaine, and you can reach me. I'd be glad to talk to you. And I think our telephone numbers and emails and so forth are readily available here, so we don't need to repeat those. But I'd like to thank you for spending the time with us this morning, and hope you will join us for future webinars. This is Bob McIlvaine signing off for today.